My name is Andy Logan. We're going to talk about stopping insider threats and innovations in data security. We're going to talk about what that means in 7 steps. Now, first of all, a little bit about me. I didn't go here. I didn't attend this school. I went to a really prestigious community college in a little town in Oregon you've probably never heard of. But it changed my life when I got into information technology. And then I started as a database guy way back when. If you guys have heard of a little company called Symantec, I started with them when they were a database company. That's how long I've been in the industry. And then that failed. Microsoft cleaned their clock. And I moved into cybersecurity, early days of antivirus, if you will, malware hunting. So for this piece, we're going to talk a lot about this. I did a little bait and switch on you. I said it's going to be about insider threat, but we're also going to talk a lot about privacy and compliance because that's foundationally where you start with talking about insider threat. And insider threat. And then we're going to talk about the future and trends. We're also going to talk about the 7 key steps to securing data. And then I have a little bit of a thing. I'm going to plug my company a little bit. I tried to keep this as generic as possible so we weren't just plugging away and talking about what I do for a living. But in here, we want to talk a little bit about this, right? When it comes to insider threats, and what we're seeing is that the regulatory landscape plays a big piece in the foundational component of stopping your employees, contractors, et cetera, from taking information off of your network, out of your cloud environment, et cetera, before that. So if you can meet these pieces of it, it lays the foundation. That is the beginning of the journey, not the end. And then we're also going to talk about the expanding information footprint and the lack of visibility around it. Now, in this piece of it here, you'll see that the piece that we're talking about here, you'll see there's a lot of things, right? Number of severity of breaches, those pieces of it. For those of you who have been around this pieces of it, you know what ransomware and monetized attacks are the big piece of what's going on here. But we're going to focus in this area here that we've seen for privacy and compliance because, as you all know, privacy and compliance is a huge part of everything that we're doing now. I was listening to the radio this morning. I listen to radio, so that's how old I am. And we're talking about the new laws around ways for businesses to manage their employees and their consumers' information. And as we talk about that piece of it, you'll see that CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, see that there's a huge amount of mandates that are coming that are going to be regulating these pieces of it. I cannot tell you how much this area here in HIPAA has grown since I started in the industry 25 years ago. And then GDPR. Is everybody here familiar with what GDPR is? It's the European Union privacy laws. And those are the foundation which became for all of the 18 laws in the United States what we're using around privacy as well. So you'll see that when you're talking to prospective employers, that this will be a top-of-mind piece for them around how regulations are handled. And I mentioned this before, that 18 states have consumer privacy laws, and we're going to talk about how we can help you meet the spirit as well as the letter of those privacy laws. But you'll hear this piece of it here that gets me every single time. I did governance, risk, and compliance for a number of years. Almost none of these requirements are exactly the same. So you end up having to map all these requirements out, and that becomes a really, really tedious process. If you're a detail-oriented person that likes to look for those nuances in it, that's the job for you. That's not what we're talking about here today exactly, though, with data security. Now, the emerging trends pieces of it we want to talk about are things we see in data security. Now, data itself is really, a lot of you probably have seen things around malware and that sort of thing where you see those pieces of it. And those are incoming attacks. And we talk about the data security pieces of it. What I found, because I did malware hunting and I did antivirus and I did all those pieces of it, SecOps from the early part of my career, and I found it incredibly frustrating because I was always chasing something I could never find. There was always a ghost in the machine. But then they said, oh, protect the database and the information in the database. And suddenly I had a hard target that I could encapsulate controls around, and that made my world a lot better for myself. The other piece of it was just too nebulous for me. Now, when we talk about the market forces in here, the zettabyte piece of it always gets me. That's just a number that I can't even imagine, 200. The point here is that, especially with big data and with cloud-based computing, is that information storage is growing. And we see this a lot in organizations that you have all of your laptops that you work with. There's servers that are fit. I got to pause for this.
This is just an evacuation, no need to evacuate the building. Or this is just the drill, no need to evacuate the building. My bad.
I was working with Alaska Pipeline about 15 years ago, and I'm a Californian. I've been here my whole life, and I was in Alaska, and we were talking about data loss prevention, and an earthquake hit when I was on the 10th floor of the Alaska building, and I flinched. I grabbed this chair, and the Alaska Pipeline people laughed at the Californian who wimped out because of a little bitty trembler. So just a little funny story. Anyway, as we talk about these pieces of it and the amount of data that's growing, we have data that's on laptops, we have data that's on servers that are in your physical brick and mortar data centers, and then we also have the proliferation of everything in the cloud, Azure, AWS, et cetera, right? Google, et cetera. All that information is there, and we need ways to protect it. And we saw that by the estimate for 2030, the year that Gartner estimates the enterprise browser will be the core platform for workplace applications. We knew that AI was going to have a lot of advantages for things like, for me, being a person that works with healthcare industry and places like that, I want to see AI doing cancer research and all of those sorts of things. And when they started doing it at a consumer level, and it was going to draw art and all those things, I thought it was a bit gimmicky, and I kind of skipped it until I was seeing the proliferation of it. Our research teams at my company and other companies, research teams saw that people who had no experience with programming, with writing code at all, were using AI to weaponize malware. And that was something that was really interesting. In the old days, Microsoft let the Excel have access to a boot record of a system, and that was a bad idea. And so when I saw that this was happening now, I also thought that AI may be a bad idea. It's actually not a bad idea. I'm cynical because of the industry I've been in for a very long time. But the point being is that all of you are probably using AI in some form now, and you're going to be much better at it than my generation ever was, and that it's going to continue to grow. And by the way, anything that can be used to make you more productive can also be used to weaponize against you and against your parents and other people like that that are using these pieces of it. So as we're thinking about security, we want to think about ways that AI can help you with that and ways that AI can be used against you as well. Now, we've also seen that, especially when you talk about the impacts of the pandemic, is that I've always worked from home. For about 25 years, I've worked from my home office, and then I would just travel to go see clients. And so with so many people moving to remote workforces, then we've also seen that the data breaches move around a lot because the information moves with you wherever you go. You also see here that the rise of lost laptops. Anybody up here ever go camping up at Serrano at Big Bear? Anybody? Yeah. So I was at Big Bear, used my hotspot for a meeting on a Friday, and I was going to blow off the rest of the day and the weekend. Saturday morning, I get up, and my car's been broken into, and my laptop is gone. I'm freaking out. And so that was pretty scary for me as a data security professional who had lost a device on there. Fortunately, none of it had really sensitive information in it, and it was encrypted, but it was pretty frightening. And this piece of it down here, you'll see that 92% of financial of the threat actors are financially motivated. And in our case, we're talking about insider threats. So when we talk about the insider threat, it means that you have an employee or a contractor, somebody who works on your organization, who has decided that they're going to take information off that and use it to sell it or to get a new job or take it to another competitor. They're going to weaponize that some way. Not weaponize. They're going to use it for some kind of financial gain. And you'll see that during times of economic challenges and companies laying people off, et cetera, that the number of insider threats continue to grow because they have nothing left to lose, right? They're going to lose their job or whatever, and they're disgruntled. So they'll use it, and they'll try to take the information off the network. You also see the other way, weaponized ransomware. But mine are about the users. Mine is about the user themselves that have access to important information. It's the insider risk. So here's what we're going to talk about: the 7 keys to securing data and achieving compliance. All right. When this phrase, governance, risk, and compliance, puts me to sleep. It is a boring piece of it when you talk about it, except when it fails, right? When you don't have these pieces in place. So as you move into cybersecurity, you're going to be very much about the technology that can help prevent attacks and keep information safe. But the foundation of that is the GRC pieces of it, and that's where you're going to say, how are we going to hone this down so we know what we're going to specifically focus on for our industry and the regulations around your industry and our particular organization itself. For example, the Cal Poly is under a lot of regulatory compliance, has a lot of things to do. And because you're students here, your information is kept in very secure ways. It's still vulnerable, and we have to be able to be careful about how it's managed, right? And this other piece of it here, it says, this understanding current gaps for processes. When you talk about big corporations and big enterprises and governments and stuff like that, most of them don't know what their current gaps are for processes. They have a pretty good idea. I mean, you have smart CISOs and that sort of thing. They have a pretty good idea what those are. But those things are very important to understand where the gaps are at. And the gap analysis comes in a lot of different ways. It could be a vulnerability assessment. It could be using your vendors to tell us where the weaknesses are at in their products. And then also understanding where your users are having problems. A broken business process could just be that I'm trying to send an email. I need to get information to a vendor because we're going to be purchasing refrigeration systems or whatever the case may be. And I cannot, and if I can email that information out, even though it has sensitive information in it, plans, whatever the case may be, and we let that go and we didn't know what happened, we've basically created a breach at that point. And then this document and practices as a group for incident processes. And you've probably all seen now where have you guys done red, blue team attack scenarios and that sort of thing with this pieces of it? Anyway, the idea is that you basically mock up an attack or an attack on your organization, and then you measure your response. How long did it take you? How effective you were, et cetera. So these are part of these pieces of it, and they're all about the documentation. And you probably heard this piece of it too. I started coding in a language called COBOL, which probably, thank God you guys never had to do that. But the big piece of it that was hounded into me was a couple of things. One was that document your code. Document your code. Leave breadcrumbs everywhere you go for whoever's going to take over your job, because you're going to be so good at your jobs, you're going to get promoted, move on, that sort of thing. So the documentation process is very important. Now, the data discovery pieces of it is where the technology pieces of it, where the rubber meets the road. Once you've identified the frameworks that you're going to work with, whether it's HIPAA or GDPR or California privacy or whatever the case may be, you want to be able to take a document, a Word document, or whatever case, Google Docs, whatever the case may be, and classify that document. And the classification of that document happens in two parts. A business process that says, hey, we are going to say this document is private, it's going to be top secret, it's going to be whatever the case may be, and then, or public or internal, and we're going to then take that and then mark that document so then that you can track it. And you as an individual should be able to identify those pieces of, but you can't always. Then you'll use the technology to come back in, whether it's a data loss prevention solution or some other tool, that will look for that information and say, oh, we can either identify the information that's in the document or in the email and say that's sensitive, and then mark it, or we can then scan the structured and unstructured data. And remember that piece of it we talked about, the zettabytes of data? Yeah. Go out and scan that huge piece, get tools that will scan that, find structured and unstructured data. And you guys know what structured and unstructured data is, right? Right, structured data, social security numbers, credit card numbers, something important to you in that sense. And then unstructured could be like plans, it could be design plans, CAD drawings, et cetera. And to be able to scan those pieces of it, determine what it is in a timely fashion, and then mark it using those classifiers. That in itself is a full-time job, let me tell you. You could spend your whole career doing that if you wanted to, especially now with the proliferation of cloud-based technologies. And then the false positives with data matching. So false positives in anything you're doing in cybersecurity happen all the time. You may see something that comes through, your intrusion prevention system sees it. It thinks that it's malware when in fact it's just a broken business process. It's one database trying to talk to another database, et cetera. And then, but being able to limit that with data loss prevention tools means that we'll often detect, those tools will see like a part number from a machine, a refrigerator or something, and misidentify it as a credit card number. So limiting false positives with the advent of machine learning and with AI is going to be a game changer. It's going to help incredibly a lot more than we do it now. Now that process is a bit of a manual process, and it's kind of painful stepping through it, because the thing about every business and every organization, all of their data is a little bit different, and they use it just a little bit differently everywhere. So that the devil is always in the details. Now, ensuring the compliance pieces of it, the big piece of it about this here is that when you're talking about the policies and rules, the geography and industry pieces of it come into play a lot. For those of you that will go to work for corporations in the United States that work with outside the boundaries of the United States, you'll see that you'll have to comply with rules for GDPR, that sort of thing, in the European Union. Other countries are adopting a lot of privacy laws. And those pieces have become important, because as you learn those pieces of it, then you can understand what the framework is for when you're protecting your users and your customers from data breaches. And then the custom policy pieces of it with GRC, enabling smooth operation. Our marketing person that wrote this called that smooth operation. We're just going to call it less bumpy, because it's always going to be a little bit bumpy in our world, right? And then the limiting of unnecessary. This piece of it is probably the biggest piece of it in here that you can see, is limit unnecessary access to sensitive information. When we talk about that, it's just understanding the access control lists, understanding who has access to your virtual cloud environments, who has access to your databases. And oh, by the way, all the people that have access to those things are all going to move. They're going to leave the organization, and then you have to retire or migrate those controls. So it takes a piece of it. That's how I worked for a little company called RSA, and about 12 years ago, they were compromised by a state actor that had figured out how to get on our network. And they also figured out that even though we were one of the leading security companies in the world, and we had a manufacturing process where the administrators of the servers left the password as, you want to guess what it is? Password. Yeah, that's just because you got lazy, right? So you have to be very careful about when you limit access to as what and to do these pieces of it. So it's very important to do those things. And the piece of it that I love the most is because when I moved away from being a malware hunter and started talking about data security, is that they said, Andy, we have these important databases that have information about our customers, our patients, our employees, your grandmother's information, credit card numbers, et cetera, and we want to protect that information. And they said, protect the database, right? And so the databases now, back then they were relational databases and that sort of thing. They sat on-premise on a Windows or a Linux server somewhere, and now those databases are everywhere in the cloud, et cetera. But to have tools that can monitor the activity of a database are very important, right? To be able to look for where the database is vulnerable, and to look to who has access to it and what kind of information is in it. You protect those three pieces of it, foundationally, you will protect a big portion of your organization. And more importantly, like I look at it, my sons are in their 30s, and they're always, oh, Dad, you work for these big corporations and that sort of thing. And I said, no, what I really do is I help those corporations protect your aunties and your grandmothers and your grandfathers' credit card information, because if they get wiped out, they're going to come live with me, and I don't want that. Now, this piece of it here, the preventing exfiltration pieces of it, the monitor and block unauthorized access to the transfer of data, which is a fancy way of saying just cut off removable devices wherever possible, and to make sure that you monitor information going to them. Today, even though the cloud and everything is so prolific, people still use 40% of all data breaches involve a removable storage device. It's just a USB stick that gets plugged in, right? So to be able to take those pieces of it and to be able to encrypt those devices. And by the way, yes, my company does it. Microsoft offers it. Apple offers it. You have encryption capabilities on your phones, et cetera. Take advantage of those for yourself personally, even if your organization doesn't. But in here, too, this piece about coaching your users, one of the big pieces about the tools that I work with that I really love is that we have a solution that we see that Bob is taking credit card information and he's trying to send it out. He's trying to do his job, and he wants to send that information to a colleague outside the organization. We'll just simply use a little pop-up that's a bite-sized nugget that says, hey, Bob, we saw what you did, and if you want a better way to do it, we're going to stop you from doing this way, but we want a better way to do it, safer way to do it. Here's some ways to do it. Use cloud storage, use whatever the case may be with access controls and that sort of thing. So the big piece about it is end user education is important. And there's an old IT axiom that says, there is no problem that cannot be solved by killing the end user. And we've taken a kinder, gentler approach that's saying this is a teachable moment. And using the tools themselves where they can give real-time comforting and feedback for end users as the violation occurs is very important. And we're a big fan of that because that piece of it alone, I worked for a huge company that made microcircuits. And they had a very much an Apple-like approach to their campus and that sort of thing. They said, we're going to let our scientists and everybody run pretty wide open and not do a lot of things to block. But they did do the coaching pieces of it. And the coaching pieces of it in themselves, just saying, hey, that's an unsafe practice. Do it this way instead. They saw violations drop by 70%. Just do that simple piece of it by saying, hey, we're watching, and here's a better way to do it. Now, the encrypting pieces of it, I cannot stress this enough. Encryption is a pain. It's difficult to use. Not anymore. It used to be really difficult to use, as I think Diane here is a cryptography person. And then the pieces of it around ensuring your data's protection. So if you do these two pieces alone, encryption and then protecting your databases, you're going to knock down a huge amount of the problems that you'll see because you'll be working with that soft, squishy core and protecting that as opposed to waiting for an attack to come in via ransomware because we all have users that will click on a link that will click on a link and then your whole organization is now infected. Event tracking is this. A lot of these pieces of it, you look at these things and you go, having a centralized location and having a way to do these pieces of it. Right now, you've probably heard the phrases SIM, SOAR, XDR, et cetera, right? Those are just logical places to keep the logging events of something that occurred on all of the pieces you're working with. Your router, switches, cloud environments, VPCs, et cetera. Anytime that has happened, collecting that information and using correlation rules. When I first started doing it, we used something called big data. We would just take and rack and stack huge servers. We'd take up this whole room for a company the size of, Texas Instruments or something like that, and do it that way. And man, that just setting it up was a full-time job. Now, because of the advent of cloud computing, a lot of those pieces have been moved off. And you can store a lot of information. And because of the speed of cloud computing, the things that the algorithms that were built for big data that are now used up there, you can get to those much faster and be able to correlate those events. And you can also see the pieces of it. A lot of times, you don't think about the fact that you just have a misfiring database. You have one database that communicates with another database, and you don't realize it. And just fixing that business process will save your organization a lot of money. And then managing the end-to-end security platforms for incident response. And that just means that you have tools that talk to each other, right? If you're a malware tool, your antivirus tool, your intrusion prevention systems, et cetera, are all communicating with each other wherever it makes logical sense, that is also key. Go ahead and put those tools together, and then you take advantage of that. The sum is greater than the parts. And then enriching the event data with threat intelligence to better understand it. And threat intelligence is really just something that organizations have been doing for a long time. Basically, cybersecurity organizations keep sensors. Anytime they have a tool like an intrusion detection system or whatever on something, if they can take back telemetry from that and analyze it, they can then parse that out and use it for like anti-fraud, et cetera. There's some huge organizations that use that for collecting a lot of information and then parsing it out. Before that process used decision trees and that sort of thing. And now with AI, that can be even better as we enrich it. So, stressing the fact of learning two technologies that are not cybersecurity related per se, anything to do with cloud, IaaS, SaaS, and then anything to do with AI, because that's the future of the world. The forensics and investigation pieces of it are another piece of it here too. This is why I got out of malware hunting and SecOps and went into data security, because I hated this part of the job back in the day, the forensic pieces of it, because it was the needle in the haystack. It was the needle in the needle stack, right? That became about the forensic pieces of it. But these are very important, and you'll meet some people that do this very well that are so good at these pieces of it. And the idea here is that there's a lot of talented people who are great at they work for three-letter acronyms, et cetera, organizations, and they're great at helping you do the forensics investigation. The part about it is that humans don't scale. Humans don't scale well at all. They get sick, they get tired, they burn out, et cetera. That's why we want to take the tools themselves and make the tools do most of it, because the robots never get sick and they can talk to each other very quickly. And so the forensics investigation components of that, how you'll augment it, will be things that will be able to say, we're going to collect the event logs from just about everything, and then look through those pieces of it, get rid of the information that's useless, normalize the rest of it, and then start looking through those stacks of it using logical things like machine learning and AI to help you dig through those pieces of it. And then this last piece, the device encryption components themselves. It seems so silly to talk about a pre-boot authentication. Everybody here uses Windows, maybe some Linux pieces of it, but authenticating, having the pre-boot authentication happen before a device boots onto your network is really important too. It's something that most organizations don't think about. And lastly, demonstrating compliance is really about reporting. And reporting is another piece of it. I talked about the GRC piece of it. It's GRC's other boring cousin because reports are really boring to watch. And they're sort of like submarine duty, right? It's long hours of boredom interrupted by moments of sheer terror, because then your reports help you do that deeper analytics about what's going on in your organization, where you can see how you started in your steady state, how you've grown your security posture, and then what has occurred. So then you can shore up the pieces of it by that continuous monitoring, and you can then say, here's where we have broken processes, and also it can help your organization decide how to manage assets and spend money in your organization to keep it safe, to keep your organization safer. Because you'll all find out once you start entering the cybersecurity workforce is that you'll always be asked to do more with less. That's just the nature of what we do. And then identifying the action plans and close the gaps. And you'll see that a lot when you talk about run books, blue books, and that sort of thing, where you have ways that are repeatable actions for things that happen over and over again. So you eliminate the stuff that's really obvious, and then you can focus on the things that are really scary. And that last piece of it, AI. I'm going to just plug my company's piece of it. It's built on AWS Bedrock. But the idea here is that Trellix Wise is artificial intelligence. Before I talked about it being something that felt kind of gimmicky, and it was like, oh, we're going to use it to write a sonnet or to paint a picture or whatever for consumer-based pieces of it. And then our teams, who are smarter than me, our analysts that do it, is that we took the AI piece of it for, this is a data loss prevention event, right? Somebody in the organization sent out information via Chrome browser to an EC2 instance, and it triggered an event. It was credit card numbers or something like that. But the analyst that was working with this is somebody who may be new to these pieces of it. It doesn't know what questions to ask. So what we did is that we took that piece of it and then we augmented it with AI so we can enrich that information around it so that someone who was less experienced could have a better piece of it. You probably can't see it in here. The non-technical steps about educating your end user, the SOC steps, what to do next about shoring up your browsers, et cetera, and the SOC investigation, review the URLs to make sure the URLs are safe, et cetera. And then this piece of it over here, because of the beauty of ChatGPT and that sort of thing, is that those questions are all things that are canned responses. But over here, you can say, hey, AI, tell me more about this. And you can ask questions yourself against it in ways that you wouldn't think. I was redoing some pieces of it where I was building some training for our engineering staff. And so I used it, and I would just pose the question in different ways and to see what other responses I get for things that even though I've been in the industry a long time, about ways that I could do it that were different. It was kind of nice because it was refreshing, because as an old hand at this, I think that I kind of get stuck in doing things the old way, and this prompted me to think about things in a fresh approach. And that is my nickel tour of 7 ways to help stop insider threats and risks. Are we doing questions? Questions? Go ahead. You want to give him the mic, or?
Questions? Raise your hand and I'll hand this mic to you.
This gentleman on the end here.
Yep.
How long did it take for you to get to where you are now?
I couldn't quite hear the question.
How long did it take you to get to where you are now? How long?
I started working on the Michelangelo virus in the mid '90s. So I started in cybersecurity, and that was the question, right? Was how long I've been in the industry? Yeah. So I worked for a database company that became an antivirus company because they lost the database wars, and they moved me to say, "Oh, you're pretty good with assembler language. Go look for viruses." So it was boot sector viruses was when I started. which was really fun, but also scary.
Do you know any like easy
You'll have
cost?
to hold the mic up a bit. Can't quite.
Do you know any easy cost ways to protect your?
I apologize. I can't quite hear the question.
Do you know of any like low cost ways to like keep your phone and your devices like encrypted or just safe in general?
That's a great question. There are a number of ways for just consumer-based pieces of it. I don't work with them as much. I came from a company, Trellix was based from a company called McAfee. You ever heard of them, right? The antivirus people. And they split that off, and they have a consumer-based piece of it, which is a fee-based. You would pay for those security tools from that organization. The nice part about it is that open source stuff is everywhere, especially in the Android platform, because Android is essentially just Linux, right? It's basically that piece of it. There's a lot of organizations that already build free security tools that are on there. Just make sure you vet them out a little bit, check the forums to make sure, because what will happen with open source is somebody will weaponize it. You got to be a little bit careful about that. But there are a number of places that I would start with, especially if you start with it, are you a Linux person? Have you started to use Linux yet? That's okay. Linux is a great place foundationally to start with those pieces of it, and then that would be because it leads into the same things around Android, et cetera. And you could get that stuff. There's a lot of free or open source stuff you could use yourself. Does that help? Great.
Can you briefly tell how do you train your models to different attacks? Like, what kind of parameters do you use to train them?
Are you talking about how we use the models to what parameters we use for looking for attacks?
Yeah.
This is why I got out of malware hunting and those pieces of it, because I hated this part of the piece of it. Because the parameters were tough for me. There's people who are way smart about this stuff. So when he's talking about the indicators of compromise, right? You guys familiar with the phrase indicators of compromise? Indicators of compromise are something that could look like normal traffic. It could look very normal behavior, but it's slightly off. It's off just a bit. And so we look at those pieces of it are things like superhuman activity, like you see that your laptop logged into a browser at 10 o'clock Pacific, and then 10 minutes later, you see it coming in from, say, Singapore. So things like that you would see, those pieces of it. We would also look for things like large amounts of data that would be outside of the normal time frame that a user would do. If a user's doing something outside of the normal time frame, those would be two obvious ones that I would use. And then in data loss security, we use something we call DRIP. And so what we would see if that during the holidays, you'll see that people will literally send their credit card number to their spouse so they can shop online. And that's one trigger, right? Because it's one credit card. And you're like, okay, it's a bad idea to do this, especially if you're using corporate pieces of it. But if you see one of those drip every 5 minutes, every 7 minutes, every 10 minutes, and it's a different number, then you would look for those pieces of it around the time scale and the timestamp, and then the difference in what type of things have changed. Those are three ones that I would say that would be obvious ones for those pieces of it when you're looking for things that are out of the norm, as opposed to something that we would know. Like for data loss security, we would say this is a credit card number, this is a social security number, this is the user, this is a source and destination. Those are obvious pieces of it. And so looking for those things that are still obvious, that are like normal communication for an email or database traffic or whatever the case may be, that's just slightly off, and you would have to look for those and kind of tailor those for each organization. Other questions? No?
Okay.
I only put one person to sleep, so I'm really happy with this. I think that's a great day. Other questions? Going once? Going twice? Okay. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. If you also want to know more about what we do at Trellix, we also have an associate SE or systems engineer program. Hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'll see if I can. We do that. We select people around cybersecurity and some internship stuff. So hit me up, and I'll see if I can find the right person for you. All right. Thank you.